well, we were talking about that the other day with Andrew about how do we live the experience of learning and writing a paper. And I am older than most of students. And at this time, I just enjoy the process of seeking the best papers, to putting the ideas together. The whole process of learning is, to me, a delight and a privilege that not everybody have. So one of the things that we aim to tell the students, don't take this for granted, because not everybody have the opportunity or the money or the time to study. Don't take it for granted. Don't write a paper to pass, because it can be really, in my opinion, which I can be wrong, very demoralizing to somebody who have to mark something that is poorly written and have little passion brought into it. Just do it with passion. Do it with willingness to produce something that is interesting, attractive.
Yeah.
But I think that comes with the years, that come with experience and with maturity too.
Yeah, yeah, that's right, Sil. I mean, part-time study is a privilege. Full-time study is a really big privilege, because there's not many years in a lifetime where you get that opportunity. Most of life is a pretty busy business once you get out there and have children and all sorts of other career obligations, and people who you supervise as well create other kinds of obligations that make it give you less space than you have when you're a student. And while when you're a student, you should read things in a purposive way. You can't read everything, so you choose to read something because there's a good purpose in choosing that particular article rather than some other article. But as you read it in a purposive way, you really have that spirit of love for learning, with a mind that's open and say, oh, that's an interesting side issue. Isn't that fascinating? One day I'll return to that. So that's part of the fun of it. So you don't want to deny yourself that fun while also keeping focused on your purpose.
Absolutely.
Hanging on to those key words that keep coming back to you, like that, so many of the things that make a difference in life are relational. So, okay, this is a very different phenomenon, but I see this relational idea about the, interdependence between people and between people and things and objects like guns. Some people have a strong relationship to their gun, unfortunately, is a recurrent, becomes a recurrent theme in any kind of criminological endeavour.
I have a question. In Brazil, that the rates of crime and violent crimes that they have in Brazil are really, really high. And they are very inventive. I am very passionate about the crimes are trade-made in that country. And if those crimes transcend to another country, and why? And as a restorative justice, Brazil is using ayahuasca. I don't know if you know what ayahuasca is. It's a vine from the jungle, from Peru, from Brazil. And they mix the vine when they cook it with the chacruna, that is the male and the female vines. And basically it's a kind of a psychedelic mix. So they can use it as a microdosing, but Brazil is doing this new trial with the very dangerous inmates, and they are very successful with the outcomes to reintegrating them into society. What do you think about this kind of, can you call this restorative?
Oh, yes, I think so. Restorative justice is a journey, and it's among other things, it's a journey of reintegration. So, restorative justice at the moment of moving out of the prison and back into a community is a particularly important site for restorative ways of thinking, especially for offenders who are particularly hard to reintegrate, you know, like child sex offenders, for example, where no community wants to have a child sex offender coming back into their community. So these are very big challenges for criminologists, but they are. It's best to see them as challenges of reintegration, and restorative justice theory is useful for thinking through how to do that, as in circles of support and accountability, which was an idea that originally came out of the Canadian prisons system, where you would actually get a community to agree to accept a child sex offender who had served their 10 or 15 years in prison and were now coming out. And this business of hounding them from one community to another as the media discovers them is a very anti-restorative pathway in terms of any possibility for reintegration. And the whole reality that this is what's going to happen when the sex offender comes out of prison means that the parole board won't give them any kind of graduated release. And, you know, in the hardest cases, we would like to do graduated release. We would like them to go out and be allowed out of prison to study some course which will help them to get some employment when they get out. But we're only willing to do that with those offenders who are less of a risk, so that we work best at reintegration where reintegration is less important. But reintegration is most difficult with someone like a child sex offender. And because they're a child sex offender, we won't take the risk of any graduated release where, you know, they'll go out to do some course, some vocational education training course being completed outside. And then if they behave badly and go hanging around outside of school, for example, they can be brought back into the prison. There can be a response to that. If they resist all of those temptations, then the graduated character of the reintegration actually helps the reintegration. But when they go into these circles of support and accountability, when that happens upon their release, the circle, the commitment is that they will call up one of the members of the circle. Let's say they want to go to a sex shop. They want to consume alcohol. That's one of their restorative undertakings, that they won't consume alcohol because the evidence is that's when they get into trouble. They won't go to a sex shop. They won't access pornography on the internet. But when they have the temptation to do these things, they'll call a member of their community's circle of accountability. They'll come around and have a cup of coffee with them and get them over that period of temptation and actually support them and get them into alternative activities, so that, you know, the evidence is that that's quite effective, that produces superior outcomes in terms of reoffending for a kind of offence where reoffending upon release, unfortunately, is a bit common compared to other kinds of offences.
One of the questions that I have as well is, for example, if you see what happened in northern countries like Netherlands, when in the meantime that Netherlands is closing jails, we are producing more jails, and those jails are private. What are we doing wrong? And why do we have to have private jails that produce earnings. I mean, they are making money out of it. What are we doing wrong?
Well, yeah, I mean, that can be a problem where you create an interest, a commercial interest in having more people in prison. Sometimes privately run prisons can offer competition to publicly run. You know, we can never underestimate how bad publicly run prisons can be. So there certainly are examples in the history of the privatisation of prisons where the privately run prison showed a better way to the public sector. But it's also, as you say, a problem that you're creating a commercial interest in sustaining the carceral complex, and that's a real danger there.
It's a question of whether that's ethically right, isn't it?
And why, in the meantime, other countries are closing down jails because they have a one-to-one partnership between the person who got and the inmate. It's more personal. It's more human to human, know them and us, the bad and the good. Seems to work much better. But what we're doing wrong in Australia? What is not happening here?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that is a big part of the need to shift criminology toward more of a focus on macro criminology and comparativism to explain to the people of the world that there are some societies that have very high imprisonment rate and high crime rates as well, and they often go together. I'm thinking of societies such as Brazil, such as the United States, Russia, El Salvador would be another one that would be right up there, very high on both counts. And then you have a lot of others that are very low on both counts, like Japan, Netherlands, Norway, Finland, and some other. Germany too.
Germany, yeah.
Yeah. So you would expect there to be a lot of societies that are high imprisonment and low crime, but where are those examples? So the message that comes from that is that the high imprisonment, high crime societies have got to have an agenda structurally of moving in the direction of the low imprisonment rate, low crime societies, and you can dramatically reduce your imprisonment rate. And when I say dramatically, I mean 90% lower than it currently is, without having problems of the crime rate spinning out of control as a result of doing that. So, you know, Japan is a society. At the time I wrote Crime, Shame and Reintegration, 30% of murder offenders in Japan, convicted murder offenders in Japan, were not serving any prison time. What they were doing was reaching voluntary agreement with the family to pay large sums of money to engage in rituals of apology and penance with the survivors of that family, and then the family saying they don't particularly want the offenders to spend their life in prison. So the majority of convicted murderers is going to prison, but this substantial minority, 30%, a pretty big chunk, you would think that that would result in the homicide rate being high in Japan, when lots of murderers are getting off without going to prison. On the contrary, Japan has pretty much the lowest homicide rate in the world, the lowest homicide rate of any large country, at any rate. So we need to challenge people with that comparativism and say, you can reduce your imprisonment rate, you can reinvest, justice reinvestment, the savings from having a lower imprisonment rate into preventive programs that really will make a difference to challenges like homicide.
Do you think, I was having this discussion with a friend of mine the other day, actually, and she's talking up, I think she heard something, the conditions of prison. Do you think that changes that as well? Because there are some of the countries that the conditions don't have to be as well, because they're a secondary punishment.
Well, I think a common respect for human rights means that if we are going to put people in prison, we must not treat them like animals. I mean, that defines what kind of society we are. If we're willing to treat prisoners with conditions of total degradation and total domination, we will put our society at risk of becoming a people, a degraded, degrading and dominating people. And that's a real risk. That's involved in the connection between high rates of violent crime and high rates of participation in war as well.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Just become the kind of society that's willing to dominate others through killing is a very dangerous thing for a society.
It is. It is.
Well, unless you have any other questions, Sil, I might.
Fine, thank you.
We've taken up enough of your time. Thank you so much. It has been an honour to have you on here. You will be the highlight on the end of for me anyway.
For everyone, absolutely. A delight to talk to you. Thank you so much for joining us, for sharing with us all your thoughts. I'm sure it's going to be amazing, terrific for students to listen. We don't know how to thank you enough for being here with us.
Thank you. It's been my honour and my delight. Thanks, Sil. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.